The Bordeaux spilled across the white tablecloth before Preston could stop his trembling hands when the photograph slipped from her perfectly manicured fingers. The VIP guest was staring straight at him. The manager was already rushing over from across the room, worried this guest would be furious at the waiter's careless mistake. But when she spoke, "I came here to find you." The silence that followed was bone-chilling. She raised her hand, stopping the manager mid-stride. "It's fine. Just bring me some napkins. I need to speak with him." In the most renowned restaurant in this small town, today there would be a very strange meeting. Preston Kraft had learned to keep his hands steady. 6 years of waiting tables, 5 years before that performing at venues that didn't matter anymore. His hands knew how to obey, even when his heart didn't. But tonight, standing in the private dining room of the Sterling, staring at a face he'd tried to forget, his hands had betrayed him completely. The woman didn't look angry. That was the first strange thing. She sat perfectly still in her charcoal suit, the kind that cost more than Preston made in 3 months, and watched him with eyes that seemed to be searching for something. The red wine pooled on the white linen between them like an accusation, but she hadn't flinched when it spilled. She'd only pushed the photograph closer to him across the table. Trevor Banks, the restaurant manager, appeared at Preston's elbow, his face flushed with barely controlled panic. "Ma'am, I am so deeply sorry. This is completely unacceptable. Preston, you're—" "Stop." The woman's voice was quiet, but it cut through Trevor's apology like a knife through silk. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. There was something in her tone that made grown men pause, and Trevor paused. "I said it's fine. Leave us." Trevor's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. His eyes darted between the ruined tablecloth and the woman's calm expression, trying to calculate some equation that didn't make sense. Finally, he turned to Preston with a look that promised a conversation later, then retreated toward the kitchen. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to break bones. Preston's throat had gone dry. He couldn't stop looking at the photograph on the table, even though every instinct screamed at him to run, to leave, to be anywhere but here. The woman in the picture smiled up at him from 7 years ago, her dark hair catching sunlight in a park he'd walked through 1,000 times since. Always alone. "Do you know her?" The guest's voice was softer now, almost gentle, but there was an edge beneath it, something sharp and desperate that made Preston's chest tighten. He did know her. God help him, he knew her better than he knew himself. He knew the way she laughed when she was truly happy, not the polite laugh she used in public. He knew she hated tomatoes but loved tomato soup, that she cried at old movies but never at new ones, that she played piano so beautifully it could break your heart. He knew she'd left him without explanation on a Tuesday morning in March, taking nothing but her clothes and leaving behind $17,000 in cash on the kitchen counter next to a music box that still played the same haunting melody every night in his daughter's room. "Yes," Preston said. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "I knew her." The woman's expression shifted. Not much, just the smallest tightening around her eyes. A breath held too long and released too slowly. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a napkin, began dabbing at the wine on the table with movements that seemed almost automatic, like she needed something to do with her hands. "My name is Vivian Harlow," she said, not looking at him. "Isabel is my daughter." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Preston's feet. Is, not was, present tense. Isabel was alive. Somewhere in the world, she was breathing, living, existing in a space he couldn't reach. For 4 years, he'd imagined her in 100 different places, happy in some other city, building some other life, free from whatever had driven her away. But he'd never imagined her mother coming to find him. "Where is she?" The question escaped before he could stop it, raw and aching. Vivienne's hands stilled on the napkin. For a long moment, she didn't answer. When she finally looked up, there was something in her eyes that made Preston's blood run cold. "She's dying," Vivienne said, and the words fell between them like stones into deep water. "Stage 4. The doctors say she has maybe 2 months, and she wants to see her daughter before she goes." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. Preston heard the words, understood them individually, but together they formed a sentence his brain refused to process. Dying. 2 months. Her daughter. Rosie. His Rosie, who was 4 years old and learning to write her name, who asked why the sky was blue and whether dogs could see colors, who had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin and no memory at all of the woman who'd given birth to her. "I don't understand," Preston said, though he did. He understood perfectly. He just didn't want to. Vivienne set down the napkin, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of years of regret compressed into a single confession. "Isabel left you because I told her she was making a mistake. I said a musician with no money would drag her down, make her small. She believed me because I was her mother, and she'd spent her whole life trying to earn my approval. So she ran." Preston's hands had started shaking again. He pressed them flat against his apron, trying to ground himself in something solid. "She left money. She left—" He couldn't finish. The music box. The only thing of value Isabel had owned, an antique that had belonged to her grandmother, left behind for a child who wouldn't understand its significance for years. "I know." Vivienne's eyes were wet now, though no tears fell. "She called me 6 months ago. Told me about you, about the baby, about leaving. She said she'd been too afraid to stay, too afraid to come back. But now she's running out of time to be afraid." The kitchen door swung open behind them. Trevor appeared with fresh linens and a bottle of sparkling water, his expression carefully neutral. He began changing the tablecloth with efficient movements, not meeting Preston's eyes. When he finished, he addressed Vivienne with exaggerated courtesy. "Can I bring you anything, ma'am? Our chef has prepared." "Privacy," Vivienne said. "That's what I need." Trevor's jaw tightened, but he nodded and left. When the door closed behind him, Vivienne turned back to Preston. "I've spent the last 3 months looking for you," she said. "Isabel remembered the restaurant where you worked before, but they said you'd left. No forwarding address. It took a private investigator and a lot of money to track you here." Preston's mind was reeling. 3 months. While he'd been serving appetizers and clearing plates, while Rosie had been learning to ride her tricycle and singing songs from cartoons, this woman had been searching. And Isabel had been dying. "Why now?" His voice came out harder than he intended. 4 years. 4 years of nothing. And now she wants to see Rosie because she's dying? Does she think that's fair? No. Vivienne's answer was immediate and unflinching. She doesn't think it's fair. She knows it's not. But she's desperate. And I'm desperate. And I'm asking you, begging you, to give her this chance. Preston closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw Rosie's face that morning, syrup on her chin, asking if they could get a piano because she wanted to play music like in her music box. He saw the tiny apartment they shared, saw the careful budget that stretched his paychecks to cover rent and childcare and everything a growing child needed. He saw the life he'd built from ruins, fragile and hard-won. "I need to think," he said. Vivienne reached into her bag again and pulled out a card. Heavy stock, expensive. An address was written on the back in elegant script. "This is where she's staying," she said, sliding it across the table. "Harbor Medical Center, room 412. She's there most days. The treatments, they exhaust her." Preston took the card. His fingers left small smudges on the pristine surface. "Does she know you're here?" "Yes." Vivian stood, gathering her bag. "She didn't ask me to come, but I failed her once by driving you away. I won't fail her again by not trying to bring you back." She paused at the edge of the table, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm not even asking you to forgive me, though God knows we both need it. I'm just asking you to let a dying woman meet her daughter. Once. That's all." She walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor. At the threshold, she stopped. "The money she left," Vivian said without turning around. "Did you use it?" "No." Preston's voice was hollow. "It's in an account for Rosie. College fund. I never touched it." Vivian's shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. "She'll want to know that," she said quietly. Then she was gone, leaving Preston alone with a ruined tablecloth, a photograph, and a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He sat there for a long time after she left, until Trevor came back and told him his shift was over, his tone making it clear that this conversation was far from finished. Preston changed in the staff room, moving on autopilot, his mind 1,000 miles away. That evening passed in a blur, picking up Rosie from their neighbor Mrs. Chen's apartment, the bus ride home, dinner, bath time, the bedtime routine. When he tucked Rosie in, she reached for the music box on her nightstand like she did every night. She turned the small key with careful concentration, and the melody began to play. Soft, lilting, impossibly sad. It was a piece by Chopin. Preston had recognized it the first time he heard it. "Daddy?" Rosie's voice was sleepy now, her eyes half closed. "Where did my music box come from?" Preston's throat tightened. He'd deflected this question before, changed the subject, made jokes. But tonight, with Vivian's words still echoing in his head, with the business card burning a hole in his pocket, he couldn't bring himself to lie. "It was your mom's," he said softly. "She wanted you to have it." Rosie's eyes opened a little wider. She asked about her mother sometimes, in the curious, uncomplicated way of small children. Preston always told her the truth in pieces she could understand. "Mummy had to go away. Mummy loved you very much." "No, she's not coming back." "Will I ever meet her?" Rosie asked. Preston's heart cracked clean through. "Maybe," he whispered. "Maybe, sweet pea." At midnight, he finally picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card. Vivian answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "It's Preston." His voice sounded strange in his own ears, tight and uncertain. "I'll bring her, tomorrow, but I have conditions." There was a pause. Then, "Anything. I stay with her the whole time. Rosie doesn't go anywhere I can't see her. And if she gets scared or wants to leave, we leave. No arguments." "Of course." Vivian's relief was audible. "Of course. What time?" 2:00. Rosie had preschool in the mornings. He could pick her up after, take her to lunch somewhere nice, prepare her, or try to. How did you prepare a 4-year-old to meet her dying mother? "Thank you," Vivian said, and the words carried the weight of more than gratitude. "Thank you, Preston. You don't know." "I'm not doing this for you," Preston interrupted. "Or for Isabel. I'm doing it for Rosie, so she won't grow up wondering." "I understand." Preston hung up before Vivian could say anything else. The next afternoon, Harbour Medical Center loomed grey and clinical against a clouded sky. Preston parked in the visitor lot with Rosie quiet in her car seat, sensing his tension the way children always did. "Daddy?" Her voice was small. "Are you scared?" Preston turned to look at her. "Yeah, sweet pea. A little bit." "Me too." She held out her small hand. We can be brave together. Something in Preston's chest broke and mended at the same time. He took her hand, squeezed gently. Yeah, he said. We can. Vivienne was waiting near the elevators, looking smaller somehow than she had in the restaurant. She was wearing a simple sweater and slacks, no jewelry except a watch. Her eyes went straight to Rosie. Hello, she said softly, crouching down to Rosie's level. You must be Rosie. I'm Vivienne. Rosie pressed closer to Preston's leg, but managed a polite, Hi. The elevator ride felt endless. At the 4th floor, the doors opened onto a corridor painted in pale blues and greens, trying too hard to be soothing. Room 412 was at the end. Vivienne knocked softly, then pushed the door open. Isabel? They're here. Preston's legs felt like lead, but he made them move. He stepped through the door with Rosie's hand in his, and the past 7 years collapsed into nothing. Isabel was sitting in a chair by the window, backlit by grey afternoon light. She'd lost weight, too much weight. Her cheekbones stood out sharp, and her hair had been cut short, probably because the treatments had thinned it. But her eyes were the same, dark and deep, and full of things she'd never been able to say out loud. When she saw Rosie, those eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately. Oh, Isabel breathed. Oh, look at you. Rosie stared. Preston felt her fingers tighten around his, felt her uncertainty. It's okay, he murmured. Go say hi if you want to. Rosie took one hesitant step forward, then another. Isabel didn't move, didn't reach for her, just let the child approach at her own pace. When Rosie was close enough, she tilted her head, studying Isabel's face with the frank curiosity of the very young. You're really pretty, Rosie said finally, even though you look sad. Isabel let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. Thank you, sweetheart. You're beautiful. You look just like... Her voice caught. She looked past Rosie to Preston, and the weight of everything unsaid hung in the air between them. Preston couldn't speak. His throat had closed up completely. He just stood there, watching his daughter meet her mother for the first time in any way that mattered, and tried not to fall apart. Vivienne had moved to stand near the door, giving them space but not leaving. Isabel wiped her eyes, took a shaky breath. Rosie, can I tell you something? Rosie nodded. I'm your mom, Isabel said, her voice breaking on the word. And I made a big mistake a long time ago. I left when you were just a baby, and I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. And I know I can't fix it now. But I wanted to meet you. I wanted you to know that I've thought about you every single day. Rosie processed this with the seriousness she gave to math problems at school. Did you leave because of me? She asked. No. Isabel's answer was immediate, fierce. Never because of you. You were perfect. You are perfect. I left because I was scared, because I didn't think I was good enough or strong enough or brave enough. But that was wrong too. I should have stayed. I should have tried. Daddy says being scared is okay, Rosie offered. He says you just have to be brave anyway. Isabel smiled through tears. Your daddy's right. He's a very smart man, and a very good dad. Rosie glanced back at Preston, checking, and he nodded encouragement. She turned back to Isabel. Are you sick? Yes. Isabel didn't sugarcoat it. Very sick. Are you going to get better? The silence that followed was crushing. Finally, Isabel said, I don't think so, sweetheart. The doctors are trying, but sometimes sick doesn't get better. Rosie thought about this. That's sad, she said simply. It is, Isabel agreed. But I'm glad I got to meet you, even just once. Me too, Rosie said. Then, with the kind of generous heart that made Preston's chest ache, she stepped closer and hugged Isabel, just wrapped her small arms around her mother's neck and held on. Isabel's composure shattered. She held Rosie like she was made of glass and gold, crying quietly, her whole body shaking. Preston turned away, pressed his fist against his mouth, fought the burning in his eyes. Vivian was crying too, silent tears tracking down her face. When Rosie finally pulled back, Isabel composed herself enough to ask, "Do you like music?" Rosie's face lit up. "I love music. I have a music box that plays the prettiest song." "I know," Isabel said. "That was mine when I was little. Do you know what song it plays?" Rosie shook her head. "It's called Nocturne in E-flat. A man named Chopin wrote it. Your daddy used to play it for me on the piano." Rosie's eyes went wide. "Daddy plays piano?" "He used to," Isabel said, looking at Preston again. "He was really, really good. The best I ever heard." "I didn't know that," Rosie said, turning to stare at Preston with new eyes. "Why don't you play any more, Daddy?" Preston had to clear his throat twice before he could answer. "Just got busy with other things, I guess." Isabel held his gaze. There was an apology in her eyes, and something else. Regret, maybe, or longing. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and he knew she wasn't talking about the piano. They stayed for an hour. Isabel asked Rosie questions about school and friends and favorite colors. Rosie showed her the drawing in her backpack, the one with the stick figures. Isabel asked if she could keep it, and Rosie said yes. At 3:30, Rosie started to get restless. Preston stood. "We should go," he said gently. Isabel nodded, understanding. She pulled Rosie in for one more hug. "Thank you for coming to see me," she whispered. "You made me so happy." "Can I come back?" Rosie asked. Isabel looked at Preston, the question in her eyes. He hesitated, then nodded once. "If you want to," he said. "I want to," Rosie said firmly. In the hallway, Vivian caught Preston's arm. "Thank you," she said again. "I know this wasn't easy." "No," Preston agreed. "It wasn't. Can we talk? There are things Isabel wants you to know." Preston looked down at Rosie, who was holding his hand and humming the melody from her music box. "Not today," he said. "I need to process this first. We both do." "Of course. But soon." There was urgency in Vivian's voice. "She doesn't have much time." The reminder hit like a physical blow. Preston nodded tightly. "Soon." The next day, he asked Mrs. Chen to watch Rosie and drove back to Harbour Medical Center. The nurse at the 4th-floor station recognized him, gave him a small smile. He knocked on room 412 and let himself in. Isabel was in bed this time, hooked up to an IV. She looked exhausted, grey-faced, and hollow-eyed. But when she saw Preston, she tried to sit up straighter. "You came," she said. "You asked." Preston stayed by the door, hands in his pockets. "What do you want, Isabel?" She flinched at the coldness in his tone. "To explain," she said. "To tell you the truth. You deserve that. I deserved it 4 years ago." The words came out harder than he meant them to. "When you left without a word. When you left our daughter. I know." Isabel's voice was steady, but her hands twisted the blanket. "I know I did everything wrong. But please, just listen. Let me tell you what happened." Preston moved to the chair by her bed, but didn't sit. "Talk." Isabel's confession came in a single raw admission. "I was terrified. My mother had already made it clear what she thought of you, and I was weak enough to let her words get inside my head. After Rosie was born, I looked at this perfect little girl and convinced myself I was going to fail her, that she deserved better than a mother too scared to trust good things. So I ran. I left you money and the music box because I couldn't face the thought of you struggling because of my cowardice. Preston's jaw clenched. You broke me, he said quietly. I had no idea what I'd done wrong. I thought you'd stopped loving me. Never. Isabel reached for his hand and he let her take it. Her fingers were cold, too thin. I loved you too much. That was the problem. I loved you so much it terrified me because I thought one day you'd look at me and see someone who disappointed you. That's not love, Preston said. That's fear wearing love's face. I know that now. Tears slid down Isabel's face. I didn't just hurt you. I hurt myself. I threw away the only real happiness I'd ever had because I was too broken to believe I deserved it. Preston wiped his eyes roughly. Why tell me this now? Because I'm dying, and I have no time left for pretending. Isabel squeezed his hand. And because I wanted you to know it wasn't your fault. You loved me the way everyone deserves to be loved, completely, without conditions. And I was too damaged to accept it. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Preston said, I never touched the money, you know. It's still there, waiting. Mom told me. Isabel smiled sadly. That's exactly who you are. Good. Stubborn. Too good for someone like me. Don't say that. Thank you for letting Rosie come yesterday. She said. She's incredible, Preston. You've done such a beautiful job with her. Preston's throat tightened. What do you want? He asked again, softer this time. Really want, I mean, from these visits. To know her, Isabel said simply. However much time I have, and I want you to forgive me. Not now, not if you can't, but someday. I want Rosie to grow up knowing her mother wasn't just the woman who left. Preston stood. I'll bring her, he said, as often as you want. But Isabel, I can't promise forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. You hurt me too badly. I understand. She leaned back against the pillows, exhausted. Thank you, Preston, for being kind when you don't have to be. He left before she could see him cry. The next 2 months moved in a strange blur. Preston brought Rosie to the hospital 3 times a week. Isabel's condition deteriorated steadily. Some days she was lucid and talkative, other days she slept through most of the visit. But she used every good moment to fill Rosie's head with stories. She told Rosie about her own childhood, about meeting Preston, about falling in love with a musician who played Chopin. She recorded videos, little messages for Rosie to watch when she was older. Preston watched it all from the sidelines, his heart breaking and healing in equal measure. He watched Vivian transform too. The cold, distant CEO had softened. She sat on the floor and played with Rosie. She brought coloring books and read stories. She was learning how to be present. One afternoon in late November, Vivian pulled Preston aside in the hallway. I need to tell you something, she said. The night before Isabel left, I showed up at your apartment. You were at rehearsal. I told her that if she stayed with you, I'd cut her off completely. No inheritance, no family, no support. I destroyed my daughter's happiness because I was terrified of losing control. Preston stared at her. You what? I can't fix it. I can't give back the years. Vivian's composure cracked. All I can do is tell you I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Preston's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to yell, to rage. But what good would it do? Isabel was dying. The past was done. Does Isabel know you told me? Yes. She asked me to. She said you deserved the whole truth. Preston looked through the window into Isabel's room, where Rosie was sitting on the bed, showing her mother a drawing. I don't forgive you, he said quietly. I don't know if I ever will. But I see what you're trying to do now, with Rosie. So I won't stand in your way. That's more than I deserve, Vivian said. Yeah, Preston agreed. It is. In early December, Isabel started writing letters. One for Rosie's 16th birthday, one for her high school graduation, one for her wedding day, one for the birth of her first child. She sealed them in envelopes and gave them to Vivian to keep safe. Make sure she knows, Isabel told her mother, so weak now she could barely hold a pen. Make sure she knows I would have stayed if I'd been braver. I'll make sure, Vivian promised, crying openly now. On a cold Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas, Preston got the call. Isabel had taken a turn in the night. He drove to the hospital going 20 miles over the speed limit, his heart in his throat. Vivian was already there when he arrived, sitting beside Isabel's bed, holding her daughter's hand. Isabel was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and labored. The monitors beeped too slow, too weak. Preston, Vivian said softly when he entered. She's been asking for you. He moved to the other side of the bed, took Isabel's free hand. Her eyes fluttered open, focused on him with difficulty. Hey, she whispered. Hey, Preston said, his voice breaking. Rosie, she's safe. She's with Mrs. Chen. I didn't want her to see. He couldn't finish. Isabel nodded weakly. Good. That's good. She took a rattling breath. Preston, I need you to know something. I loved you. Every single day I was gone, I loved you. And Rosie, she's the best thing I ever did. Promise me you'll tell her that. I promise, Preston said through tears. I promise, Isabel. And you. She turned her head slightly toward Vivian. Mum, stop punishing yourself. Be there for them. Be the grandmother I couldn't be a mother. Vivian was sobbing. I will. I swear I will. Good. Isabel's eyes drifted closed. I'm so tired. Then rest, Preston said gently. It's okay to rest now. Will you play for me? Isabel asked, her voice barely a whisper. One more time? The nocturne? Preston looked around the stark hospital room. No piano, no music, just machines and white walls and death creeping closer. I can't. There's no... Dang it, Isabel breathed. Please. So Preston did. He sat beside the woman he'd loved and lost, holding her hand, and hummed the melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. The same melody that played from the music box every night in Rosie's room. His voice cracked and broke, but he kept going. Vivian hummed along, her voice blending with his, and together they filled the room with something beautiful. Isabel's breathing slowed, steadied, and then, so quietly, Preston almost missed it, stopped. The monitors flatlined. A nurse came in, checked vitals, turned off the machines. Preston just sat there, still holding Isabel's hand, feeling the warmth leave her skin. She's free now, Vivian said softly. No more fear. No more running. That night, he held Rosie on the couch and told her as gently as he could that Mommy had been very sick, and the sickness had won, and she wasn't hurting anymore. Rosie cried, confused tears that broke his heart. Will I forget her? Rosie asked through hiccuping sobs. No, Preston said firmly. We have pictures and videos and stories and the music box. We'll remember her together, okay? Okay, Rosie whispered, burying her face in his chest. The funeral was small, just Preston, Rosie, Vivian, Mrs. Chen, and a few people from Isabel's old job. They played Chopin's Nocturne as they lowered the casket into frozen ground. Rosie held Preston's hand on one side and Vivian's on the other. Afterward, Vivian approached Preston carefully. I'd like to be part of Rosie's life, she said. "If you'll let me." Preston looked at this woman who'd caused so much damage, who was trying so hard to make amends. He thought about Isabel's dying wish. "Okay," he said. "But we do this my way. No throwing money around. No trying to control things. You want to be her grandmother? Then show up. Be present." "I can do that," Vivian said. "I want to do that." And she did. In the months that followed, Vivian became a fixture in their lives. She came to Rosie's preschool concerts. She babysat when Preston worked late. She learned to braid hair and make grilled cheese and read bedtime stories. She was awkward at first, but Rosie's unconditional affection slowly taught her how to soften. 3 months after Isabel's death, Preston walked past a pawn shop and saw a keyboard in the window. He bought it with money from his next paycheck, set it up in their tiny living room. That night, after Rosie was asleep, he sat down and played for the first time in 6 years. His fingers were rusty, stumbling over keys they used to know by heart. But the music came back, slowly, like breathing after being underwater too long. Vivian heard about it and showed up the next day with a gift. "Isabel wanted you to have this," she said, handing Preston a worn folder. Inside were sheet music collections. Chopin, mostly, but other composers too. Isabel's notes were scribbled in the margins. Preston traced her handwriting with his finger, and something in his chest loosened. "Thank you," he said. "She never stopped loving you," Vivian said quietly. "What you two had, it was real. I destroyed it, but it was real." Preston nodded. He still didn't forgive her. Wasn't sure he could. But he was learning, slowly, that holding on to anger hurt him more than it hurt her. "I know," he said. Time passed. Seasons changed. Rosie turned 5, then 6. She started kindergarten and lost her first tooth and asked 100 questions about everything. Preston taught her to play simple songs on the keyboard. She was a natural, her small fingers finding notes with ease. She had Isabel's musical ear. Vivian sold her company. She bought a small house 10 minutes from Preston's apartment. She said she wanted time, wanted to be close, wanted to not miss any more of life while chasing things that didn't matter. Preston noticed the change in her. She smiled more, laughed easier, seemed lighter. On Rosie's 7th birthday, Vivian gave her the first letter. "Your mum wrote this for you," she explained. "For your birthdays." Rosie opened it carefully, her reading still slow but determined. Preston read over her shoulder. The letter was simple, age-appropriate. Isabel told Rosie she loved her, said she was sorry for missing her birthdays, told her to be brave and kind and to never be afraid of loving people. "I miss her," Rosie said when she finished reading. "Me too," Preston said. "Me 3," Vivian added softly. They sat together eating birthday cake, looking through old photos of Isabel. Rosie asked questions, and they answered honestly. About the love story, about the fear, about the leaving. They didn't hide the hard parts. They gave Rosie the truth in pieces she could hold. That night, after the party, Preston sat at his keyboard. He played the nocturne, all the way through without stopping. His fingers didn't stumble anymore. The melody filled the apartment, sad and beautiful and full of everything he'd lost and found and learned. When he finished, he realized Rosie was standing in the doorway in her pajamas, the music box in her hands. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "But that was pretty, Daddy." Preston held out his arms, and she climbed into his lap. They listened to the music box wind down to silence together. "Daddy," Rosie asked, "do you think Mommy can hear music where she is?" Preston pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I think if anyone can, it's her, he said. She loved music more than almost anything. More than us. No. Preston's answer was immediate and certain. Never more than us. That's one thing I'm sure of, Sweet Pea. She loved us most of all. Rosie nodded, satisfied. Can you teach me to play it? She asked. The song from my music box. Preston set her on the keyboard bench beside him, positioned her small hands over the keys. Together, slowly, they picked out the melody note by note. Rosie giggled when she hit a wrong key. Tried again. Preston guided her with patience he'd learned through years of single parenting, through grief, through the slow work of healing. This was what Isabel had wanted, he realized. Not perfection. Not a life without mistakes, or fear, or pain. Just this, her daughter learning music, surrounded by people who loved her, building something good from broken pieces. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall. Inside, a father and daughter played Chopin badly and beautifully, filling their small apartment with imperfect music. And somewhere, Preston chose to believe, Isabel was listening. 3 years later, on a spring morning when Rosie was 10, Preston received an envelope from Vivian. Inside was a photograph he'd never seen before. Isabel, heavily pregnant, sitting at a piano with her hands resting on the keys. She was looking at the camera with an expression of such pure joy it stole his breath. The note with it read, "Found this in her things. Thought you should have it. She was playing your song. Always your song. V." Preston hung the photograph on the wall beside Rosie's music box, which sat on a shelf now, too precious for daily use. That afternoon, he picked Rosie up from school and took her to the park. They got ice cream and sat on a bench watching people pass by. "Grandma Viv said you're teaching piano now," Rosie said, chocolate on her chin. "At the community center." Preston nodded. He'd started 6 months ago, just a few students, mostly kids. It didn't pay much, but it felt right, like coming home to a part of himself he'd locked away. "Yeah, it's good. I like it." "I'm glad," Rosie said. "Mom would be too, I think." "Yeah," Preston agreed, his throat tight. "I think she would." They finished their ice cream in comfortable silence. Then Rosie asked, "Daddy, when I'm older, can I read the rest of Mom's letters?" "When you're ready," Preston promised. "Grandma Viv has them safe." Rosie leaned against his side. "I wish I remembered her more. I have the videos and the pictures and your stories, but I wish I could remember her voice. Her real voice, not just recordings." Preston wrapped his arm around her. "You know what, though? You've got her music in you. Every time you play piano, every time you sing, that's her. She's in the way you hear melodies, the way you understand rhythm. That's remembering, too, in its own way." Rosie thought about this, then nodded. "That's a nice way to think about it." They walked home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Mrs. Chen waved from her window. Vivian's car was parked outside. She was making dinner tonight, had insisted when Preston mentioned he was too tired to cook. This life they'd built was strange and imperfect, stitched together from loss and mistakes and the hard work of showing up. But it was good. It was enough. That night, after dinner, after Vivian went home, after Rosie had practiced her piano lesson and gotten ready for bed, Preston tucked her in like he'd done every night for 10 years. She was getting too old for it, probably, but neither of them had the heart to stop. "I love you, Daddy," she said, hugging him tight. "I love you too, Sweet Pea, more than anything." "Even more than piano?" Preston laughed. "Even more than that." Rosie smiled. She reached for the music box on her shelf, and Preston stopped her gently. "How about we save it," he said, "for special nights, We don't want to wear it out." "Okay," Rosie agreed. "But can you play the song instead? The real version?" Preston kissed her forehead and went to his keyboard in the living room. He played Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat from memory, pouring into it everything he felt: the love, the loss, the forgiveness he was still learning, the gratitude for what remained. The music filled their small apartment, floating down the hallway to where Rosie lay listening in the dark. When he finished, the apartment fell quiet. Preston sat at the keyboard for a moment longer, his fingers resting on the keys, thinking about Isabel, about the scared girl who'd run from happiness, about the dying woman who'd fought so hard to make amends, about the letters waiting for Rosie, guideposts from a mother who'd learned too late how to be brave. He'd never fully forgiven Isabel for leaving. He'd never fully forgiven Vivian for driving her away. But he'd learned something Isabel never had until the end, that love didn't require perfection. It required presence, effort, the willingness to stay even when everything in you screamed to run. Preston stood, turned off the lights, checked on Rosie one last time. She was asleep, her chest rising and falling peacefully, one hand curled under her cheek. She looked like Isabel in the dim light, the same delicate features, the same long lashes. But she had Preston's steadiness too, his quiet strength. She was the best of both of them, untouched by their mistakes, full of possibility. Tomorrow he'd wake up and make breakfast. He'd walk Rosie to the bus stop and go teach piano lessons. He'd have dinner with Vivian once a week because she was family now, complicated and flawed but trying. He'd keep building this life, note by note, day by day, creating something beautiful from broken things. In her room, Rosie dreamed of melodies only she could hear. On the shelf, the music box waited, patient and perfect, holding its song for when it would be needed most. And somewhere in memory, Isabel smiled, finally free from fear, watching over the family she'd loved too much to keep, but never stopped cherishing. The story ended not with grand gestures or perfect healing, but with this: a small apartment filled with music, a father raising his daughter with fierce, imperfect love, a grandmother learning that presence mattered more than control, and a child growing up knowing she was wanted, treasured, enough, exactly as she was. Some wounds never fully heal, some mistakes can't be undone. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, love finds a way to grow in the spaces grief leaves behind. And that, Preston had learned, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.